Hey Sunspace Sun, I'm Daisy Victoria, and welcome to today's topic all about making a brass diadem inspired by the ancient Egyptian styles. You may have seen in a prior video where I talked a little bit about diadems when I went over some of the different types of jewelry that we find in ancient Egypt. I even made my own diadem out of little metal filigree links. Now, there are so many really amazing diadems that have been found from ancient Egypt, and I will share with you guys a few of those diadems. Diadems range in design from less complex to more complex. Some of them are more like a simple band, some have more bits hanging from them. I mean, there's just so many different ones, and this is only just a fraction of what was there in a very long-standing, very amazing and advanced civilization. I have for a long time wanted to create my own ancient Egyptian diadem because I actually do living history and reenactment. I do have a brass circlet and it works well enough, but I have always wanted to make one that's a little bit more like the examples. And in today's video, we're gonna do just that. I recently moved to the Pacific Northwest, and I have a new friend named Susanna Hurst. Susanna has been gaining a lot of skills in metalwork and jewelry making, and this is something that I would like to gain some skills in. So I teamed up with Susanna, and she helped me to learn some basics of jewelry metalworking, and she helped me to put together my first diadem. So to get inspiration for this project, I looked at a lot of the ancient Egyptian diadems that I know and love. My favorite one is actually in this book, Ancient Egyptian Jewelry, and it is this one. I actually was very, very lucky. I got to see this diadem in person when it was in the Ramses traveling exhibit that came through Houston while I lived there. So I mean, it's like when you see a celebrity, but for me, it's like ancient artifacts that I love. So seeing this in person was pretty freaking cool. And this diadem is actually in the Cairo Museum, and it typically lives there, so it was very rare to see it in the US. I knew that I wanted to make a simple band going around the head. Now, some Egyptian diadems are like a band base, and well, lots are band based, right? But some of them have another piece that goes up on top of the head, which is really cool. So that's maybe something I would try in another project. For this one, just doing the band, very similar to this one, except without all the extra dangly bits. Now, if you look at a lot of the ancient Egyptian diadems found in tombs, you'll see that a lot of them have these like round, floral themed pieces attached to them. So that was something I wanted to do for mine, was a floral theme. I am a lover of floral themes after all. Here we go, let's get started on the project. These are Susanna's lovely hands measuring out the amount we need to cut off of this metal piece. So this is a 1-inch piece of brass metal that we purchased at the local hardware store. To find the length that we needed, I measured around my head and then transferred that onto the piece of metal. Here we are designing where we want to put all these cute little scarab gems that we found at the gem store. I was going to put one gem on the diadem to begin with, but when you find a whole bunch that are perfect, you kind of have to use a whole bunch. So I mean, just make more work for yourself, no problem, right? We're using this tool that has different size circles so that we can figure out what size we want to make the little circular flower things that we're going to put the scarab gems onto. Once we had that all figured out and the sizes decided, we're coming back to the diadem band and we're marking where we want to attach all of those. So we're using measurements here to make sure they are evenly spaced. And now it's time to make some flowers. If you are like us and you can't just like freehand the flowers perfectly, don't worry, there's a solution. You can pull up a picture of a flower and trace it. And then I have something that's even better for you. You can actually print them out, and then you can just use those printouts to cut out from a metal sheet. So this is a metal sheet that Susanna already had. It's also brass, and we used scissors to cut out lots and lots of little flower pieces. And we are layering the flowers so that there are 2 flower pieces basically per little flower design. So cutting flowers went on for quite a while. Also filing the edges of flowers went on for quite a while. Here we are removing the spray adhesive that we used to stick the paper onto the brass sheeting. So after we cut the flowers out, then we remove the paper. So we actually use the paper the whole way through to cut them out. And this is just mineral spirits used to dissolve that glue. Whatever glue you're using on a project, make sure you read the instructions so you use the right thing to dissolve it. Okay, so next part is making bezels, and this is something I had no clue how to do at all. So Susanna is showing me how you take this smaller strip of brass, and we're basically using that to create the bezel that goes around the gemstone. So we want to wrap that around and make sure that we cut it to the right length, so that way we can fully encase that gemstone in there. Now it is time to heat things up with a torch. Yay, fire is always fun. When you heat metal, it becomes more malleable, which means it is easier to bend and actually work with. So we are heating up that metal strip that we're using for the bezels. And then look how much easier it bends. I know you can't really see because you have to kind of feel it, but just take my word for it. It bends more easily when it's been heated. Okay, so making the bezel, the ends of that little brass strip need to meet up pretty perfectly at the edges. So you need to file anything that's not quite letting them meet perfectly. And then they need to be cleaned off because we're going to solder this together, and anything that's on there like oils from your hands and stuff like that will potentially get in the way of the solder and not make it bond properly. With solder, you want to use flux. That is what helps the solder to flow. Here we are putting a little bead of solder in there on the part of the bezel that meets together, and then we are going to solder that together. Again, here comes the torch. We are going to heat that up, and with the flux and the solder in there, once the solder reaches its melting point, it is going to melt into the join point of that little bezel. To create the little solder pieces we're using, we are cutting little pieces of solder, and when they're heated to a certain temperature, they kind of become these little solder balls, which are very nice and easy to use. The bezels seemed really, really difficult at first, and they're definitely a learning curve. I was super proud to finally get one together, and I actually got quite a few together after that. Susanna got quite a few together also. So I'm finally getting the bezels to work, sort of. The bezels. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you have to make this tiny little thing and then stick a tiny little bead of solder in the middle. Thank you. My words are leaving.
Well, it's been a long day.
Yeah, and then you have to spray flux on it and then melt it and, well, not melt it, get it to flow in there.
Which is melting it.
They're really, really pesky. And if you get one to work, then it looks like this, and you can put the stone in there. Success. So next we need to affix the bezels onto these flowers. So what we're doing here is we've actually attached the bezel to a backing, And then we're going to attach that backing onto the flower. This is all done with solder. All of that sort of wet stuff on the band is flux that we've sprayed on there. And then what we need to do is put a piece of solder in between what we want to solder together and then heat it up. By this point, it was getting pretty dark out. We actually decided to do this in a single day. I mean, why not, right? When you have one day to do a project, let's just do a crazy one. You may have noticed in a lot of the examples that the circlets go all the way around the head. For me, because I sometimes wear different things on my head, like different wraps or whatever, I decided that I'd prefer for mine to tie in the back. So what we're doing is rounding off the edges, and then that way I'll be able to put a little tie thing back there and attach them together. So I have to drill out some holes in the edges, and then that will be where a little string goes through.
Yay!
I made a hole.
You did make a hole there.
We made holes. Yeah, it's like you can totally see it coming together now, finally.
Now that it's done, you can see it coming together.
Now it's time to clean up the circlet. This is a wire bristle brush, which Susanna tells me I can find at Harbor Freight for a very good price. And after it's cleaned up, we are putting the gems into the bezels. At the end of the project, we did end up moving some of the gems and flowers a little bit just to make them a little bit better, because when we had first attached them, a couple of things had shifted a little bit. And I didn't film a whole lot of this because at this point it was like probably 1 a.m. And it was time to finish up this project. I ended up wearing this diadem all weekend at an event. So I went to an event within the Society for Creative Anachronism. The event was called Great Western War in Southern California. And okay, so you guys, I used to live in the Los Angeles area, and I used to go to this event every year, but I hadn't been there in a very long time since I moved away. So it was really super fun to go back and go to this event with all these people that I love and haven't seen in years. And since it was very, very hot this year, I brought out my ancient Egyptian persona the entire weekend, and I really got to test out my diadem. So let's take a look. I think that sometimes we get sort of this idea that we're very good at certain things, and if we start a new project, we have to be super good at that too. But in reality, it's totally okay to be a beginner, because let's face it, we're not going to become experts if we are not first beginners. And also, sometimes we just want to dabble with something different and have fun, and that's totally okay too. Now, one thing I did not mention, because we didn't actually do it, is to add a protective coating to the brass. There was a protective coating on the strip that we purchased from the hardware store, but we removed that by heat treating it. So that's something that I need to do for future wear, and something that I advise you to look into if you are for some reason using this as a tutorial or learning how to work with brass. Thank you so much for joining me on this super fun adventure. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, come back and see more projects. If you got some inspiration, I'd love to see what you do. You can find me on the social medias as Daisy Viktoria. My website is daisyvictoria.com, and a special thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who help me to create all kinds of fabulous and fun projects. I hope you guys have an absolutely magical day, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye!